This morning, safety concerns after a mass shooting at Fort Stewart in South Georgia. We asked the congressman representing that area what can be done to prevent future attacks. He's in the game. A former college football coach wants to be Georgia's next U.S. senator. But one of his Republican primary opponents says the political newcomer has been on the sidelines too long. And we sit down with the latest Democrat to jump into the governor's race.
Let's do what's best for Georgia, not what's best for any political party.
Why Michael Thurman thinks it's his time to lead the state. It's all right now on the Georgia Vote. And we will get to the politics in just a moment, but we start here. It has been a week of violence across our state with 2 active shooters in as many days. The first at Fort Stewart, the latest, a fatal attack outside the CDC. A gunman opened fire outside the CDC's Atlanta campus, triggering lockdowns inside the facility and at nearby Emory University. No civilians were injured, and the suspected shooter was eventually killed, but a DeKalb County police officer, David Rose, was fatally shot when he responded to the call. DeKalb County CEO Ellen Cochran called the loss a tragedy.
This evening there is a wife without a husband. There are 3 children, 1 unborn without a father.
The CDC shooting, the latest in a violent week in Georgia. Just 2 days earlier, a different gunman opened fire at Fort Stewart outside of Savannah. Investigators believe that soldier, who shot 5 other service members Wednesday at the South Georgia military base, used a personal handgun. Authorities say the suspect was quickly arrested after other soldiers tackled him. Congressman Buddy Carter, who represents the district that includes Fort Stewart, talked with reporters in the hours after the suspected shooter was in custody. I asked him what needs to be done to prevent these attacks in Georgia.
We need to make sure that we are addressing the needs, the mental health needs of our soldiers and of our constituents and of our citizens. And it is truly a mental health crisis, and this is something that needs to be addressed.
The soldier accused in the shooting had been assigned to the base for about 3 years. All 5 victims at Fort Stewart are expected to recover. We will continue to provide updates on the investigations into this week's active shooters as we learn them on air and online. Well, it is starting to feel like true campaign season in Georgia. The field of contenders for major 2026 races is growing this week, and so are the stakes. It all began Monday when former football coach Derek Dooley entered the GOP field for U.S. Senate.
Professional politicians like John Ossoff are the problem. Lawlessness, open season on the border, inflation everywhere, woke stuff, that's what they represent. We need new leadership in Georgia.
Dooley, who has close ties to Governor Brian Kemp, launched his campaign with that video announcement on Monday. He joins a Republican primary field that includes Congressman Mike Collins and Buddy Carter. All 3 hope to unseat Democratic incumbent Senator John Ossoff. Now, that Republican primary, it is still more than 9 months away. We will discuss the race and the growing fault lines inside that GOP primary in our Politics Roundtable. That's coming up in just about 5 minutes. Well, Democrats saw a major shakeup this week as well, with a well-known Georgia lawmaker launching his campaign for governor. Former DeKalb County CEO Michael Thurman entered the Democratic primary on Wednesday. Thurman's resume also includes past experience in statewide office as the former state labor commissioner. I talked with Thurman this week about his campaign for Georgia's top job. The big question on everybody's mind, why do you want to be Georgia's next governor?
This is a pivotal moment in the history of our state. As a result of the big, beautiful bill, there's been a historic transfer of responsibility and authority to states. And I believe that if we can build coalitions, if we can focus on the kitchen table issues, what I'm hearing when I travel around Georgia, people want us to focus on reducing the cost of groceries, making health care more affordable, making the ability, helping the ability to pay rent and mortgages, making it more affordable.
I think you used the phrase bridge builder in your announcement. Is that a fair description of how you feel you are as a politician?
Well, not just as a politician, but as a person. Even before I entered elective office, I've always felt that the most important thing we can do, number one, is to listen, and out of that, to build consensus, to be a bridge builder. And sometimes, Zach, you have to be the bridge yourself. We can create more opportunities. We can grow our state if we can rise above the partisanship, hyper-partisanship, rise above the divide between North Georgia, South Georgia, urban, rural, suburban, and do what's best for all Georgians.
You talk about rising above the partisanship, but you've also criticized President Donald Trump's signature Big Beautiful Bill, which was a partisan bill passed along partisan lines. What partisan fights do you want to stay away from, and which ones do you think you will be fighting?
Well, partisanship is a part of the American process. What I really focus on is hyper-partisanship. Hyper-partisanship puts politics before people. And I'm concerned that the result of what happened in Washington is going to put access to health care at risk for 750,000 Georgians. We have at least 4 rural hospitals that are at risk of closing because we've not expanded Medicaid and made health care more affordable. What I'm saying is, let's get back to the basics.
What is the #1 challenge facing Georgia right now, and what is your plan to fix it?
We must bridge the divide between urban, rural, suburban. We must build bridges that will bring people together, white, black, Hispanic, and Asian, rich or poor, Republican or Democrat, to work together to do what's best for our state. Let me tell you something. Food insecurity has no political affiliation attached to it. Thousands, tens of thousands of families, urban, rural, suburban, are struggling to put food on the table. I want every Georgian who wants a good job to be able to find one. And I want all of our children, private and public school kids, to have access to a quality education.
One name I don't think I've heard you say once in this interview is President Donald Trump. What do you see the relationship between the Georgia governor's office and the federal government under the Trump administration if you win this race?
I will work with anyone who wants to work for and on behalf of the people of Georgia. Whatever I can do to build bridges, to create opportunity, whether it's with the Republican administration in Washington or Republican members of the Georgia House and Senate. Look, there's a discussion about fighting Trump. I'll fight for working families. And if that's fight President Trump, so be it. But it's not the only thing you have to fight against. It's not who you're fighting against, but it's who you're fighting for that makes the difference. And I'll be fighting for hard-working Georgia families.
And there is much more to my conversation with Michael Thurman. The entire interview is available to watch right now on 11 Alive Plus. You can stream it for free on any of your devices. Well, there's always so much to talk about in Georgia politics. This is the perfect time to bring in our Politics Roundtable. Today we have Republican strategist Jen Ryan. She is the founder and CEO of Final Draft Communications. She previously served as Vice Chancellor of Communications for the University System of Georgia and as Deputy Chief of Staff of Communications for Governor Nathan Deal. Making her Georgia Vote debut, Maria Andrade, Democratic strategist and co-founder of First Edition Strategies. She's a veteran political advisor with experience in advertising and nonprofits as well. And from the AJC chief politics reporter, Greg Bluestein, also an author and a contributor to MSNBC and NBC News. Maria, you are making your maiden journey with us, so by tradition, you get the first question.
Perfect.
We just saw that interview with Mike Thurman. What are the other contenders in this Democratic primary thinking now that he is officially in this race?
Absolutely. So Michael Thurman is definitely someone who brings a lot of experience into this role, but I think that we haven't seen his fundraising numbers just yet. We have 2 very capable candidates in this race with Jason Estevez and Mayor Bottoms, who have shown that they have the capacity to really fundraise here. So I'll be curious to see what that would look like.
Sometimes fundraising can be a wall that keeps potential challengers out. We have seen those fundraising numbers from former Atlanta Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, State Senator Jason Estevez. They were both kind of in the about $1 million range. Clearly, that wasn't enough to scare off Mike Thurman. If you're Thurman getting into this race, what's your strategy?
Yeah, no one's writing Michael Thurman off because not only has he won statewide before as labor commissioner, 3 different elections, but also he was the CEO of DeKalb County and a superintendent of DeKalb County. So he has a long record of being elected countywide in the Democratic world. DeKalb County is the most important county. At the same time, though, he got walloped in 2010 when he faced Johnny Isakson. There was questions about his fundraising ability back then, and there'll continue to be questions about whether or not he can amass the resources needed to win such a competitive primary here.
Jen, you're a Republican strategist.
Right.
In that interview, as we were watching it, you said out loud, oh, that's an interesting point. Mike Thurman spent a lot of time talking about urban but also rural Georgia.
Right.
That stood out to you.
It did, and let me just say that he had a really strong working relationship with Governor Nathan Deal. I know that he has been a champion for school choice when it comes to schools that are failing and giving kids a leg up regardless of zip code, urban or rural. I am really interested to see how this goes because, as Greg pointed out, he has the statewide chops with also the track record in the Democratic stronghold of DeKalb County. He's going to be a formidable opponent whether you're in the Dem primary or in the general.
Primaries tend to pull candidates towards the polls of their party. You see Thurman tacking towards the center, it seems, on a lot of issues. Maria, is this a strategy that can win in a primary format?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I would be very interested to see how it works. I think voters in Georgia are very smart, and at the end of the day, they're going to understand and they're going to go with what the issues that each candidate is talking about. And I think in this case, this might prove to be a smart strategy on his end, but we'll see. I mean, Jason Estevez and Mayor Bottoms both have really good platforms that I think are going to really appeal to voters as well.
Thurman represents a different generation of Georgia Democrats as well. Is there an overlay with that aspect onto this race?
Yeah, he's in his 70s. He's running against much younger candidates who are calling for generational change. Michael Thurman has always called for a base plus strategy. Get your core liberal Democrats, but also build on that with the centrist appeal. He does have that old centrist appeal. Whether or not that works in today's Democratic primary is the big question.
Talking about centrist appeal, let's shift topics to the Republican side of things in the Republican Senate primary, where there is not a lot of running to the center right now. We have an ad that Mike Collins cut and launched just within about 60 minutes of Derek Dooley's entrance into the Senate primary. Here's a little bit of what the Collins camp had to say.
Derek Dooley has spent his life on the sidelines, avoiding the fight to save America. Derek Dooley never fights, never wins, never Trump.
Never fights, never wins, never Trump. That is the attack from the Collins campaign. Of course, Derek Dooley in his own launch video touted his support for President Trump, but this is sort of maybe a highlight of a clash and a flashpoint coming forward in this campaign. Jen, Republican strategist looking at this, what's going on here?
So he being Mike Collins, is definitely staking his claim as the Trump, crowned candidate or Trump preferred candidate. That being said, I think with the team that Derek Dooley has assembled and some of his big name supporters, yes, he was a little slow out of the gate. I do concede that, but it is a marathon and not a sprint. And I think that there's going to be a lot to play out. Also, fundraising numbers. But Mike Collins he's got his finger on the pulse, much like Trump.
Not to cut you off, Greg,
Yeah.
10 seconds to you, last sentence, one sentence answer. How big of a deal is the Trump endorsement going to be in this race?
It's huge, but also don't discount the Governor Kemp endorsement because he's putting the full might of his political machine behind Derek Dooley.
Yep.
That was good. That was one sentence. We like that. We will be back with more from the Roundtable in a moment. And later today on the show, you will meet this week's voice of the voter. She is an advocate for early childhood education. Hear what guides her vote coming up. This week, a simmering conflict between the two main Republican candidates for governor spilled over into federal court. On Thursday, Chris Carr raised the stakes in his weeks-long quest to block Burt Jones's ability to use some of his massive campaign war chest in their ongoing primary battle. The latest development, a federal lawsuit. Chris Carr is the state's attorney general. Jones serves as Georgia's lieutenant governor. Both are Republicans. In his lawsuit, Chris Carr alleges that Burt Jones is taking advantage of a special fundraising committee to gain an unfair and, he alleges, unconstitutional advantage in the GOP primary. The committees were created by Georgia statute a few years ago. Under current law, Jones does have access to those committees, but Carr does not. Neil Bidding, Chris Carr's campaign manager, defended the lawsuit in an interview with us.
So what we're doing is making sure that the law is upheld and the same rules apply to everybody.
Now, Chris Carr previously raised these campaign finance issues in a complaint to the State Ethics Commission that was rejected. The Jones campaign has also repeatedly pushed back on these allegations. Their latest, they say, Georgia's lackluster attorney general defended this law 2 years ago. That's Jones spokeswoman Kendall Parker. She went on to say, now Carr is running for governor and he wants to challenge the same law he once defended. If hypocrisy were an Olympic sport, he'd take gold. Carr filed the suit in his personal capacity, not as Attorney General. His campaign manager, Neil Bidding, said if there ever was any involvement of the AG's office, Carr would recuse himself. Maria, as a Democrat, do you see this infighting and think, this is great for us, we don't have to fight this battle?
Absolutely. I think as Democrats, we're grabbing the popcorn, watching and sitting back. But the reality is that Chris Carr is just getting a little taste of his medicine. And I think that he is now experiencing what big money is doing in politics. And now all of a sudden he understands that it shouldn't be in it. And all of a sudden he's changing his tune, right? So it's just going to be interesting to see where it goes from here.
These leadership committees were a flashpoint when they were being spun up a few years ago under state law. Jen, I can sense you are itching to get in on this.
I would just take a step back and say this is not just Republicans only, and it's not the governor's race only. This affects the Democrat leadership committees as well. And so these are new. I mean, they have been challenged with the State Ethics Commission and now in federal court. I would not be surprised to see maybe some legislative tweaks to it, but this is not just about the governor's race. This is about how do we apply this fairly over both parties in multiple leadership.
Federal lawsuit is a pretty overt attack here. Is this a sign of more to come?
Yeah, it's a sign of more to come. This is a huge issue, too, because it does. Look, there's no way to put it any other way. Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones has an advantage because he can use this fundraising vehicle to raise unlimited cash, even during the legislative session. It only applies to governors, lieutenant governors, nominees for both those jobs, and legislative leaders. So it does not apply to Chris Carr. So he is making the case that, hey, this guy over here can get $1 million checks while donors to Chris Carr are limited to about $12,000, $13,000 for the primary phase. So this has already reshaped Georgia politics, this law, and it could have a lot more ramifications.
And you heard Neil Bidding, Chris Carr's campaign manager, raise that issue. He said, at bottom, this is about fairness. We fundamentally believe that the Jones campaign has an unfair and they argue unlawful advantage. We're going to see how this plays out in court, of course, from a strategy perspective and a public perception perspective. Jen, if you're advising the Carr campaign, is there a risk that some people may see this suit and the prior ethics complaint and view it as an effort by a candidate who has substantially less money in the campaign war chest trying to use kind of extraneous means to even the playing field?
I do think that by the time you explain it, you've probably lost most people's attention span.
That's the story of campaign finance, right?
It is. And to remind viewers, this was created essentially as a way to bypass the state parties, which are anemic and probably a lot more harm than good many times. So I do think it requires maybe some legislative tweaks. I don't think that there is hypocrisy necessarily, but there is a risk of losing the voter the more you delve into this. I really do.
We've got 40 seconds left. Lightning round here. Former Lieutenant Governor Jeff Duncan was a Republican through his political career. Now he says in an AJC column he is a Democrat. Maria, is the Democratic Party going to welcome him with open arms?
I think he's going to have a little bit of a hard time explaining to Democrats, particularly because we have so many good Democrats in all of these different races already there. So I do think he has a little bit to talk to voters about.
Jen, your thoughts?
I think at a time when the Democrats as a whole are at maybe a 30-year nadir in approval ratings, his switch is pretty indicative of just his values and his reputation.
As always, we have so much more to talk about. Unfortunately, we are out of time for now. Thank you all so much. Thanks for staying with us through another block of the panel. Good news, more Georgia Vote is up right after this. Welcome back. The next chance for Georgia voters to go to the polls is with a special election for a Metro Atlanta State Senate seat. Brandon Beach, a Republican, gave up his spot at the Gold Dome to become the U.S. Treasurer in the Trump administration. Early voting is now underway for the District 21 seat, which covers parts of North Fulton County and Cherokee County. There are 7 candidates in this race. 6 of them are affiliated with the GOP. And that's not really a surprise, as the Republican, Brandon Beach, had very little trouble keeping his seat during his 12 years in office. Election day in this race is August 26th. That is 2 weeks from Tuesday. We're coming right back with our voice of the voter. She specializes in quality care for children, and that is what is on her mind as she heads to the voting booth. Well, we say it every week. You can't have the Georgia vote without Georgia voters. This week, we head to Brookhaven to talk with Ellen Cochran, who leads a nonprofit dedicated to childcare. It's back to school time. Everyone's thinking about their kids, education, and their care. This is a space that you do a lot of work in, right?
Yeah, quality care for children, we really focus on making sure that families can find quality childcare in their communities, which is a really important foundation for kids as we think about their educational life in Georgia.
You guys act as a bridge in some ways, kind of connecting all the different elements, right?
Yeah, we work really closely with child care providers to help them make sure they have sustainable care, make sure that it's quality care, and then we really hope to find families and connect them to that quality care and help them be able to afford it if we can.
What do you love about what you do?
I love working with child care providers. They are so passionate about the children and their care. They get into this work because they love children and they want to see them succeed. So walking into a classroom and seeing those teachers down on the ground engaging with children and seeing their brains just really soak in the opportunity to have those kinds of relationships is incredible to me.
Makes a big difference for those kids too, right?
It makes a huge difference.
There's a lot going on in the state of politics in Georgia and around the world, not the least of which here in Georgia. We've got a Senate race coming up, a governor's race. What's the number one issue you want these candidates, your elected officials, to focus on?
You know, Zach, I mentioned earlier about my own personal challenges and the affordability of child care, and that was 18 years ago, and families today are experiencing that even more. So in Georgia, we really want to focus on opportunities to help families afford child care, whether that's increased child care subsidies or working with employers to incentivize their support in affording care. Those are the things that we know are really important to parents.
What do you worry the most about right now?
You know, we have incredible child care providers, but they're really operating on what families can afford rather than the cost of quality in many cases. And so recognizing that these are small businesses that have a really tough model, and how can we support their sustainability? Because without them, it's really difficult for parents to work and feel good about where their kids are.
We always end with this question. What are you optimistic about?
What I know is that people really realize how important early learning is for our country, both for working parents and for literacy. And so when I go into those child care providers who are working, all day to be with children, I get excited because I can see that they really care about the kids in their care. And they're there because they know that their work makes a difference.
Well, thanks for watching us today. We hope to see you right back here again next Sunday at 11 for another edition of the Georgia Vote.